Hello and welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage, once again working on my race 55 Chevy. Today I'm concentrating on the floor X, which is in the middle of the chassis, and the transmission crossmember because they are in close proximity to each other. So first thing this morning, I came out and I put my dummy transmission case back up against the motor plate. Much easier this time because I use the transmission jack. It seems easy to hold an empty case up there and put 4 bolts in it, or a few bolts in it. But without the aid of dowel pins, it's a trick. So I use the transmission jack. Since I have cut out the Lenco slide that was between the double frame rails, I have more room to pull the transmission back and lower it down, or just the opposite, put it in. With that Lenco slide still in place, I could come back off the motor plate and let it down, and it did clear. So I have a reference point thinking of in the future of removing the transmission. I still prefer to remove the transmission from underneath. I have built and had cars that the transmission went in through the passenger compartment. And it's nice if you have a removable tunnel, which this will have. The whole tunnel, the top of it, above the double frame rails, comes right out and you're looking right at the drive line. And that's really handy if you happen to be thrashing and people are helping. You can have people up top and people down below. But having to actually physically remove the transmission up through the car is not a lot of fun. My 5-speed Lenco, I would actually use an engine crane and go in over the door X on the passenger side and lower it into place, because that thing weighed a ton and I was usually by myself. So let's go down and see what I'm dealing with so far. I'm using, well, this is the first one I made, drop crossmember. It's only a mild drop. Back when I was playing with the affordable bender and the speedway bender, you can go back and look in the videos. I really didn't document this. I just tried to see if I could figure out how to do it in that style bender, and now with my rotary draw benders, I've gotten better at making these. And I had notched this in a hurry one day, and it's technically too small, but it is pretty handy. I've used it several times so far, you know, just to see what I need for clearance. So it's not completely useless, but it's still too small. And the crossmember I build is going to have, I'll probably make the majority of it drop out. It'll just have short stubs over to the inner frame rail. I have a second set of these Applied Racing Technology brackets, and these are actually SFI approved. But the way I position the 6C crossmember, the front one, and a few videos ago, once again, I still need to make a playlist for the Race 55 if anybody cares to go back and look. So right now they're just on my channel, but they're not organized. I'll try to do that maybe later today. So because I put the 6C bar the way it is, it's straight across the chassis, coincident as the book says, I can do anything I want with the transmission crossmember. It can be any size, any dimension, it's wide open. But I like this plan. One, these are 1 5/8" already, and the weight difference, this doesn't weigh hardly anything, so I'm going to make an 1 5/8" crossmember, and it's just going to end up, the whole car is going to be stronger because of it. I could make a little short crossmember with something else, but I have nothing that's really, you know, too trick to be able to disconnect it, because it's, you know, still the center of it still has to drop out so I can service the transmission and get it in and out of the car. A few other concerns I have on the governor cover on the back of my transmission. I have a dump valve hanging back there, so that takes up some real estate. You gotta take that into account. And in this case, the floor X in the car, the SFI book says it has to be as long front to back as the frame rails are wide. My frame rails are 27 inches on the inside. So I need to be at least 27 the other direction. And despite a 55 Chevy being a pretty big car, they're not that big and running out of real estate in a hurry. So let's get down and take a peek at what we got so far. But before we do, I gotta run outside and do a small errand because it's gonna snow again tonight, I believe. So I meant to do it before it snowed last time. Let's just go get it done. Outside, behind the green box, digging out a big block Chevy block. It snowed the other day. I meant to do it before then. Clearly I didn't. It's gonna snow again tonight, so I'll go get the two-wheeler and drag it inside. This is after uncovering it. Bunch of old wheels and tires in the way. I got it dragged over this far and blew it out a little bit with an air hose, making sure it wasn't a ski lodge for a bunch of mice or anything. The first use of the dummy big block Chevy is to make motor mounts for that Willys pickup that's on the left. The Race 55 will someday get a small block Chevy, big block Chevy, and LS motor plates. We're starting with the LS because that's what I have at the moment. So underneath, sorry about the bright light, let's go the other direction. So with string, I'm kind of mocking out the way the X would look. And this is the second Crossmember I made. And I've gone ahead and notched it so it fits perfectly between the frame rails. But it shows me that I need more drop. I'm actually touching the transmission over there. And I really need to go another 1.5 inches or so forward. So I need more drop. The crossmember needs to go forward because that string representing the 1/2 of the X needs to be pretty much where the crossmember is now. I went out to the box, the tan box, and got a new energy suspension mount. And I see an awful lot of transmissions show up here for me to fix. More bright light coming through the firewall. Without this plate above the mount, it comes with it. It's not a spacer, it's a preload for the entire mount. So if you don't run that top spacer, well, it's not a spacer. I just made the same mistake. If you don't run the preload bar, your mount is pretty much useless. So I will run a mount, obviously. With motor plates, I like the 2 motor plates and then a poly mount for the transmission. I will not mount it solid, ever. And I will have engine limiters. I'm going to incorporate these. If you're wondering what those are, if this had a steel bell housing, it would actually have ears on the bell housing that would bolt to these, and it would bolt to the motor plate. But these are actually preventing the engine from going fore and aft. But obviously I don't have an iron bell housing or steel bell housing to hook it to, but I'm going to make rods using this nice threaded hole that'll go up to the factory motor mount on the engine. Because you have to have a limiter, otherwise when you accelerate, the engine goes the other direction and you break stuff. Because the way they're made, this mid plate, for instance, hugs the chassis pretty close. A lot of times the wings on a motor plate to reach the frame rail are quite wide. So this motor plate, mid plate, is quite strong, but the front one typically goes up and hits the upper bars of the chassis, and it's quite flexible. So you have to have an engine limiter. Well, here it is, several hours later. I'm frustrated and soaked with sweat because I popped out this crossmember, and I roughly remember the dimensions I bent it to. So for the new one, I had a piece of tubing that was just slightly longer than what it needs to be. So now my center bend has to be accurate. So I wanted to determine a way to figure that out so I can repeat this if I'm ever dealing with a piece of tubing that's only so long. And I did. I went within 1/4 inch of being dead center. This was already marked, and if you measure to the ends, I'm within 1/4 inch, and that's fine because I need to cut off like 1 inch on either side. But that's all I had to spare. Not even 1 inch, really. Yeah, maybe 1 inch on either side. So I set up for the first bend. I kept pulling out the drive pin out of the clamp that holds it to the shoe. so I could adjust it and measure and take my guess. I didn't notice that the pin, after I got done moving it around, was up out of the bottom of the clamp. It was up. I made the bend. I went stroked all the way to the end. I looked down and I could see this is now all bent on the bottom. So I took the pressure off, took the drive pin out, reached down to grab this, and there was a big shot of metal that went straight into my thumb. So we dealt with that first, and yeah, it's not too bad. I put a fresh glove on. I haven't had it off again. And then I had to straighten this thing enough that it could at least be usable for the rest of the day. I probably should have quit right then. It would have prevented me from bending the handle of my vise, trying to put enough pressure on this to hold it. When you're mad enough that you bend the handle on a vise without any assistance, you should probably quit. But I did. I guess I ate my Wheaties this morning. So I managed to bend it back and beat on it, chase it around the floor, because every time you hit it, it goes boing. I swept under the bench yesterday, and this thing wanted to go under there every time. No matter where I drop it, if I drop it right now, it's going under the bench. Some kind of magic exists around my bench. Bermuda Triangle, it sucks them right in. So I got it back to the point where I couldn't use the pin, because I don't want to mess up the pin. That survived. And the bender is fine. And when I was messing around with a 1-inch die when it wouldn't fit, I had cut a bolt that was just slightly smaller. So I got a bright idea to use that. And I was able to finish my bend. So I went 50, 25, and 25 degrees and let the spring back be what it may. And this is going to work. However, I am not going to notch it today because I'm just done. I'm only human. Some days don't go quite as smooth. And if you don't include that too, you can't, just put out the image that nothing bad happens, because that's not real. So I'm frustrated, and I ruined my new bender. I didn't ruin it, but I'll call JM out tomorrow, buy another one of these. I'll probably buy a spare for each one. I guarantee you I will never hit the foot pedal to stroke the cylinder without making sure all my pins are down. So I guess if you make a mistake and don't learn from it, no, that's a tragedy. But if you can at least learn from your mistakes, and I guess this could be a spare. So it's 1/4 inch, very springy, not much fun because you have to line up. And by the eye, I got it back in position. This thing was way out of shape. I was too frustrated to film, so. Anyway, so now this is going to work, and I will notch it another day. This fits the chassis perfectly, so at least I have something to go by. And then I'll put it back between the frame rails. You usually got to tap it in with a rubber hammer. I'll make the bracket on the transmission. And then to make the cut for the brackets, the dropout part, I'll mark it. And then I'll probably have to dig out the abrasive chop saw because I can't be inaccurate with my cut. And I can only spare the kerf of the blade, so. Because once I notch it to size between the frame rails, there's a little bit of leeway, but not much. So that's my plan. Another day. Probably tomorrow. So I'll go heal up my thumb. Make sure my tetanus shot is up to date, and move on. This is why you buy an American-made bender. At least I didn't stick Chinese steel into my finger, right? Well, who knows where the steel came from. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.